You told me once you cost your company $1 million in fines, but you didn't got fired. What just happened there? How is it possible?
So this was at DTCC. I had just started. I think I had been at the company maybe 6 months. And I had misunderstood the concept of what they call IPLs, or initial program loads. I was rushing at the end of a day and somebody called me and said, you should do X, Y, and Z. I didn't know they meant to do that Friday. They IPL'd that night. And so the changes I made threw everything off. The next morning I come in and I look at my desk and all of a sudden I start seeing people whose pictures are on the wall. You know what I mean by pictures on the wall? The CEOs, the CIOs. You don't see those people in general. They were standing outside of my cubicle, which did not feel good. They're like, what did you do last night? I have to go and get interrogated by every level of the organization up to the CIO. So they tell me that it was $1 million worth of money.
Now, shifting gears to your survival metrics framework. What inspired you to develop this framework and what challenges in the product management does it address?
An example of this is the famous Facebook 7 Friends in 10 Days. Have you ever heard of the 7 Friends in 10 Days?
Welcome to the Product Founder Podcast, Adam. To start off, can you share a little bit about your journey and what led you to become a product management executive and AI lecturer at Columbia University?
Well, that's always a bunch of bumps in the road, right, that you don't expect. I think my road is a little different than what people may expect. I started off in the world of mainframes, actually. I was a mainframes and a founder of a startup at the same time. So I founded this company called The Gamer Studio, which ran for a couple of years, and I sold in 2011. And then I came to New York as a mainframe programmer in 2010. And so I came into product through the mainframe. There is this role in the mainframe world called a mainframe architect, which is very similar to a product manager, where I spent time with our customers, I did research, and I basically determined what features would go solve what problems for the customer. And so I spent a couple of years doing that, and then I went into consulting for a bit at this place called Philosophy, which I always call my finishing school for product, where I got a chance to work with companies like Google, Casper, and PwC. Between that and my mainframe time, I got a little bit of time with AI, right? So I got into the AI sphere pretty early, around 2011, 2012. After Philosophy, a bunch of product leadership stops at places like Informed, Smart Recruiters. And I've spent the last 2 years consulting. Primarily, again, focusing on product strategy and product development. And a friend invited me to Columbia and was like, hey, I think you'd be interested in this. Tried it, enjoyed it, and now I find myself teaching AI at Artificial University, teaching AI at Columbia University. And so my road that got me into product was somewhat accidental. But then once I found it, I fell in love with it. And so that leads me here.
Super cool. And when you worked as a mainframe architect, what sort of product were you building the mainframe for?
Oh, so the mainframe's already built. And so the mainframe architect is more so thinking about products in that space. And so the types of products, I managed, I think, 5 products while I was a mainframe architect. First was a printing product, where I was the person in charge of printing everything that got printed by the mainframe. And so at the place that I worked, it was called DTCC. DTCC deals with a lot of transactions. In fact, last year they dealt in $2.8 quadrillion of transactions. And what they do is they are the place where people deposit their trades. They call it a depository, to make sure that there's a safe place where you can get any type of paper as it relates to your trade. you can get it from DTCC. So they will send it out and they will print it to you. I was the person in charge of printing all of those things, right? That was what my product was. The other products that I had managed while at DTCC was some of their first AI products. So there's something called predictive failure analysis, which from IBM, which I was in charge of, and also some of IBM's first forays back into using graphical user interfaces with the mainframe, something called ZOSMF. And so I was the manager of that too. And a couple of, and you throw in a couple of architectural change management programs and a bit of automation. And those were the products that I first managed. That's where I started.
Super cool. Super cool. And when you're now teaching as a lecturer, AI topic to students, how does it feel the difference between like being as a product manager, as a consultant, dealing with companies and people, and at the same time dealing with the students? What are the differences or similarities?
I think the biggest difference is how students and professionals disseminate information. When I first started teaching at Columbia, I was so used to talking to professionals. And what happens when you talk to professionals on a regular basis is you end up using a lot of shorthand. And so I'm making a ton of assumptions on what students understand and what they don't. And students don't really ask as many questions when they don't understand something, right? Like I'm so used to a more professional environment where there's always somebody in the room that'll go, wait, I don't understand this. Please, I'm paying you money. Tell me what this means, right? Where students will kind of sit back and they'll assume maybe something is coming. And so it took me a little bit to understand that with students, I needed to simplify as much as possible and get to the most important foundational concepts. And so for AI, that was the idea of like transformers and the understanding how the bread is buttered, right? Spending a lot of time talking about that as opposed and talking about what is possible, what isn't, as opposed to just kind of going off and having a general AI course, right? Again, it's like the difference between you happen to watch, if I remember during our pre-show conversation, you happen to watch my Pendo AI class, right? And there, right, I can just go ahead and do freehand. I don't have to explain what research is. I don't have to explain what architecture is. I don't have to explain how you work with engineers or designers, right? These are things I can take for granted. Whereas in an AI class in college, right, I'm dealing with students, graduate students who generally have not a ton of experience, if they have any at all, in these concepts. So that's the big difference, is having to break things down versus using a lot of shorthand with professionals.
Makes a lot of sense. I remember when we were discussing about this podcast episode, I asked you if you have any interesting stories to tell. And you told me once you cost your company $1 million in fines, but you didn't get fired. What just happened there? How is it possible?
So this was at DTCC, right? And so the background is I just started. I think I had been at the company maybe 6 months. And, I'm just in a mode where I'm just trying to listen to whatever people say. And I had misunderstood the concept of what they call IPLs, or initial program loads. So in the mainframe, everything is done, right? But nothing takes effect until an IPL. So you can pretty much stack your work. And because you're stacking your work, it's very important to understand what happens as a result of one thing or another thing, right? You need to understand the chain of events. And I was rushing at the end of a day. It's like a Thursday. It was a Wednesday or Thursday. I was rushing, and somebody called me and said, you should do X, Y, and Z. I didn't know they meant to do that Friday. I was just in the mode of just like, well, I guess I got to do it. They IPL'd that night. And so the changes I made like threw everything off. And so the next morning I come in and I look up I look at my desk, and all of a sudden I start seeing people whose pictures are on the wall standing outside of it. You know what I mean by pictures on the wall, the CEOs, the CIOs. You don't see those people generally, right? There's a picture there's like they see them on a video, but they were standing outside of my cubicle, which did not feel good. And so I get there, and they're like, "What did you do last night?" Right? And I'm giving them I just made this change. I don't know what I did, right? And so I go through this like. I have to go and get interrogated by every level of the organization up to the CIO, with each person that I got interrogated by before sitting in the room. So eventually it went from my manager and me having an interrogation to my manager director and me having an interrogation to a manager director VP having an interrogation all the way up to the CIO. So I'm just sitting in the middle of a room with a bunch of people just staring at me. And so they tell me that it was $1 million worth of fine, $942,000 and $942,068 of fines. Is what it boiled down. And like a day after, I swear I'm fired, right? Like this is it. But luckily, I had this great VP. He's a mentor then and a mentor now. Love the guy's name is Tony Dolan. He's recently retired, right? And what I didn't know in the background is he was fighting for me, and he was saying, like, look, those senior engineers shouldn't have told him to do that. He's new. He just started 6 months ago. And so after all of it kind of calms down, he sits me in his office, and I go, why am I not fired? And he tells me, well, you're a bright kid, and I think that $1 million mistake is just going to be a great investment in your time here. And I think you understand why you did what was wrong. And I think you're going to be a net positive here, which, is one of the most touching things I got from him. And I guess he was right. I was there for 7 years after that.
So you worked there for 7 years?
Yeah, 7 years after.
After that. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
As I said, Tony is still a dear friend and a mentor to this day.
That's a very good story. That is a very good story, and that is maybe something that today in the companies we are lacking. Like that chance of maybe forgiveness and maybe giving the person room for mistakes, right?
Yeah, he informed so much of how I became a leader, with the teams that I ran. He didn't have any space for nonsense, right? He expected results, right? But when it came to growing someone and when it came to building somebody's esteem and giving them responsibility and challenging them, but also knowing that, hey, I'm on your side here. And hey, I'm looking out for the long-term you, right? And I am somebody that you can trust. He was great at it. He's one of my favorite people I've ever worked for.
Yeah, that's really great. Like before the year 2000, my grandfathers, they used to start working at a company and then die in that company. So that the loyalty toward a company was so high, and also from the company toward the employees was so high. But as we reach to this era of technology, people are working for companies for 1 or 2 years, just kind of want to have the logo of that company in their CV and just move on, and you're the employee number 1,000,001. So you're not that important. But things like this, these experiences really makes you want to feel be part of that company, and makes you really feel in a way like a family, right?
Yeah. I mean, Tony was at DTCC he started the year before I was born. And he retired, I think, a year and a half ago, right? So just about 40 years at that company, right? Just imagine that, And the average tenure there, at least when I left, was 17 years. So it was just a company that people, like even when, it's a finance company, just it was known on the street as the retirement home, kind of chuckle, but like this is a place where you were expected to work a long time. They treated you well. And, at the end you get your gold watch and go home, and unfortunately I've from what I've seen, even there now, that's not true, where they're back to what you just talked about, which is 1 or 2 years, you do your time at DTCC and you're gone, which is a reflection of, I think, a lot of problematic things on how we think about work. And, it's not healthy, but it's the world we live in, unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely. You sent me 2 concepts that today I would like to talk about that. So let's dive into your concept of the 5 deadly sins of strategy. Can you give us an overview of what these roadblocks are and why they are so detrimental to effective strategy execution?
Gotcha. So a little background on the 5 deadly sins. One thing that over the 15 or so years that I've been working around strategy, the thing that I've noticed is that regardless of what strategy is there or what is working or what people present, a lot of times people don't use it. They don't use it to make decisions. And so a strategy that does not guide decision making is dead. I did a bit of research and I was just very curious, like, why is that? What is that? How long has this been going on? And then I found out that 90% of strategies are not operationalized fully. 90%, right? Like it wasn't just something that I was feeling. It was something that has been researched. And so I started asking myself, why? Why aren't these strategies operated on? Now, yes, strategies can become much better. And I agree with that. And I give a whole workshop on product strategy and how to make it. But it didn't matter, right? If it was well made or crap, people weren't leveraging it. And so I paid attention to, teams, the teams that I've worked for, or teams that I had consulted with, and I saw 5 behaviors that teams will tend to, traps that these teams will tend to fall into, that will turn a strategy that they all put a lot of energy to at the beginning of the year, right? They do the kickoff, they tell the story, and by March, no one's paying attention to it. Everybody's just kind of going off of impulse. And so those 5 sins, I call them sins, right? Those 5 sins of strategy operation, or those 5 deadly sins of strategy operation, are hiddenness, where teams do not show people where the strategy is. They kind of just, not on purpose, but they don't ever bring it up. And so out of sight, out of mind. Ambiguousness, which is where you don't have a clear problem and a clear person that you are solving that problem for. Right? I can bury you in paper, but if I don't know what we're working towards, who's it, and who we're working towards to help, I can't really make decisions. Next is untrustworthiness. And so this is when you, as a product person, and I'm focusing on product, but in general, these work. But as a product person, you tend to not share your failures, right? This one was fascinating because it led me to talk to a bunch of executives of different disciplines, right? So the head of sales, or talk to a streaming network, a VP of programming. I talked to a VP of customer experience, right? And a lot of them do not trust product because they see there are a lot of behaviors that product do. Again, it's not purposeful, but it leads to folks not trusting what they say and what they do. And so if they don't have trust, they're not going to lock in with you. They're not going to follow what you say. On the other side of that coin, there's selfishness, which is, you can boil that down to whenever your strategy is a lot more I than we, right? talks about what's good for the product, but it doesn't talk about how it affects business outcomes. So other teams are just going to ignore it. And then lastly is staleness. Strategy is an alive document. And unfortunately, a lot of teams build that strategy in November. Right? We're getting into strategy time now, October, November. And they do not update it until the next year, if they update it at all. And so that staleness leads people to not follow through on it. And so those are the 5 deadly sins: hiddenness, ambiguity or ambiguousness, untrustworthiness, selfishness, and staleness, which will kill your ability to operate on a strategy and have it guide people's decisions.
Yeah, it's very interesting, these 5 pillars. I personally feel I had experience working with different companies and within company many times when there wasn't a strategy in place, but it lacked one of these pillars that you talked about it. And you also mentioned that a good strategy is like a live plant, not a statue, and it's evolving. So can you like a little bit more elaborate on this metaphor and how it's like applies in like product management?
Very much. It's one of my favorite metaphors recently. I kind of fell in love with it. Good strategy is like a plant. It's reacting to so many different factors, right? A plant reacts to sunlight, the water, the food that you give it, the environment and the air. Strategy is very similar, where it's reacting to it's reacting to the people, it's reacting to the competition, it's reacting to the releases that you have, right? There's so many factors that come into it. Unfortunately, what we tend to do is we tend to create a strategy as if it's a statue, right? And we don't treat it as if it's a plant, right? We make it in October, November. We have some kickoff meeting. And then afterwards, it's a statue that some people look at, right? You just look at it as you walk by. You don't engage with it. You don't feed it. You don't give it air. You don't water it. You just look at the statue from time to time and go, "Oh, that's nice," and keep walking, right? There are plenty of statues in New York City. Not once do I care about a statue. I look at a statue and go, "Oh, that's interesting," and move on. My apartment has plenty of plants. I care about my plants, right? I water them. I give them air. I tinker, right? I play with the soil. That's how you should treat your strategy, right? Not as a document you just look at and go, "Oh, that's interesting," and walk on. It's something that you should be constantly tinkering with and tendering, so that when these forces happen, both internally and externally, right, it can grow. It can evolve with you.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I really like that metaphor. It just also shows that we need to be adaptive over time. And we, as a company, which we're building a product, things are changing and we need to change with that.
Yes, 100%. If you don't change, you're dead. I love that saying, right? Especially as it relates to tech. The problem is product strategy tends not to follow through with that. And so we end up with statues instead of plants.
Do you think how often we should update, let's say, our strategy? Or not even maybe update, but just go back and revisit it every quarter and we half year?
So I like revisiting the strategy every cycle of work. So if you're running in sprints, taking a look at the strategy each sprint. And so this is not an update. It's just let's make sure that we're in line. Let's just check in on the problem that we're solving. Let's check in on how we plan on being different or our bets for the quarter. And during the workshop, I tell people to, let's say you run sprints, right? You're an agile shop. Taking 5 minutes during your sprint planning session, 5 to 10 minutes, and saying, "All right, here's the strategy. Let's take a look at it," can do wonders in terms of helping people align and focus on what's important. Now,
Yeah,
the
absolutely.
update piece, updating, I recommend doing once a quarter or so, right? That's more of a workshop where leadership or the people that are responsible for that strategy Right? They are prepared with the data that affects that strategy, and then they go into a room and they spend some time changing it, working on it, making sure that it is reflective of what they want to do. Because what comes out of that is, one, an updated strategy for everyone to follow, and two, it builds a discipline to look at what you're building and saying, hey, this is a plant, not a statue. We're going to come in every 3 months and we're going to tend to it. We're going to nurture it, as opposed to just, again, look at the statue and say, oh, that's interesting, and move on.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, toward the second concept, shifting gears to your survival metrics framework. What inspired you to develop this framework, and what challenges in the product management does it address?
So what inspired me was I was a product leader at a startup that had recently did layoffs, and I noticed that they were stuck. Right, they were like molasses in terms of making changes. But I'm the new product leader, so I got to come up with a way to help them get out of their current concepts of what works. And I need them to get out of the sunk cost fallacy and thinking about the past. I need them to be aware of what's in front of them. And so that became the inspiration for me to create survival metrics. And the problem that it helps solve, it helps product teams get out of sunk cost fallacy, right? Or the want for us to commit to things because we have spent time on them, and get into the habit of scenario planning and making decisions, right? In a way that brings people in, and also reminds people that what's happening is alive, right? Things can change. And so we want to be in front of it so that we can change when it most suits us versus reacting, which often leads to people changing months after it could have been effective, right? Some act of God is making them change, as opposed to them thinking about the problem that they're trying to solve and what's best for the company or what's best for the user.
Yeah, absolutely. And how do they differ from traditional metrics used in the product management?
So survival metrics are all about the action of stop, pivot, and invest. Metrics are great. There's always metrics trying to do anything and everything. And I love metrics, but these survival metrics are focused on those actions, right? And because they're focused on those actions, you're looking at measurements, trying to understand clauses, right? What is forcing us to think or act? You're thinking about the action itself. What are things that are going to make us stop? Which is a powerful, right? Stopping is powerful, right? Because stop tells us what our values are, and stop is an action that no one takes lightly. Pivot, which is, hey, what's going to make us stop and have a conversation? Now, we may or may not pivot based on that conversation, but we have it on the calendar. It's on the agenda. We're going to go talk about this. And then there's invest, which is another place, right? Lately, I've been really trying to get teams to understand the invest piece, like of this metric more than anything else, because invest represents opportunity, and that opportunity can somehow get missed. And one thing that Richard Rumelt writes in Good Strategy, Bad Strategy, which is a book I recommend anybody interested in strategy read. One thing that he hammers in that book, and also The Crux, which is the follow-up to that book, is that opportunities are why we create strategies. We are creating this unnatural document that is telling everybody around us in all these different disciplines, hey, stop what you think is important. This is important. I need you to follow this. The reason why we do that is when these opportunities show up, we now have the muscle to say, stop, we're going to go chase this, right? And this is going to differentiate us in the marketplace. This is going to make us stand out. This is going to bring outsized returns. What companies tend to do is they tend to try to fit opportunities inside of a regular working schedule, right? Oh, when this sprint ends, we'll switch over. No, if something is worth investing in, we need to have a facility that allows us to say, stop everything. This is going to change the nature of our platform. This thing that we were working on isn't even important anymore, right? Why are we finishing it? Who cares, right? Who cares that we're working on a pricing page, right? There's this feature that we know if we can get people to use it, if we build it, and we know if we can get people to use it at this clip, it'll create this amount of growth. An example of this is the famous Facebook 7 friends in 10 days. Right? Have you ever heard of the 7 friends in 10 days?
No, I haven't. Can you explain a bit?
So Facebook, when they were a young startup, they they were kind of middling around, and a product manager of theirs was looking at the data and realized that, you know what, this is interesting. Hey, if somebody makes 7 friends in 10 days, they are automatically stuck on the platform. They don't go anywhere. They are, and matter of fact, they're inviting people to the platform. Right. And so they prioritized that over. They just stopped everything and said, 7 friends, 10 days. That's what we care about. 7 friends, 10 days. That's what we care about. Now, this product manager is now a very famous VC. I'm going to leave that up to your audience. They should know who this VC is. Very popular. But this was the thing that launched him. And imagine if they do what most companies do, which is, 7 friends in 10 days. This sounds interesting. We'll relook at this in 6 months when we have engineering time. Right? I guess we're all on MySpace now. Who knows? But, when I think about strategy and I think about what Ramelt says, and I think about 7 friends in 10 days, and I look at what companies are doing instead of that, it makes me want to, focus on that invest part. We need to have signals. When we find signals that are important, we need to go ahead and invest them. If that means we need to double the amount of engineers working on something, then we should do that, right? We should stop and have that conversation. And if a PM, if a PM and a designer or whoever's kind of orphaned, I guarantee you there's a million things that they can do. I guarantee it, right? No one ever gets fired for lack of work because we never run out of work, right? There's a way of using these resources effectively, but it's a shame because then this other stuff doesn't happen in real life, and now you end up with wasting your opportunities, right? And if you're wasting your opportunities, why do you have a strategy?
I love that story. It kind of reminds me of a quote from Steve Jobs. He said, we as a company are happy for the products that we have built. And also we as a company are happy for the products that we haven't built. And I see the similar patterns of when something is kind of working and you see some sort of result there, just focus on it. Just don't jump to another functionality, building something and just spreading yourself too even. Yeah.
The thing that I love to do if I'm a product leader in a company is I start looking at whacking things immediately, right? Very much like Steve Jobs. Because everything that you build has a cost associated to it. It has to be maintained. Now there's a customer base that wants it, and when something breaks, they have to be fixed, or else there's reputational risk now when this is happening, right? All of these, it's not free, right? And so it is worth our time to figure out what we are good at, what serves our customer, where our opportunities are, and just getting rid of the rest. Because what does that do? It frees us up to focus on the thing that matters. And if you can focus on that, that's how you create your iPhones. That's how you create your MacBooks, right? I'm sitting here on a Mac now, my whole house is powered by, their Apple's ecosystem. They have 12 products, 13 products, right? Like, compare that with every other company right now. They'd be the Apple, Stream Deck, the Apple microphone, the Apple pen, even though they have a pencil, but you get the point, right? It's important for us to focus on the problem and the solution, and not be so anxious and create more.
Yeah, absolutely. When I was reading your framework, I noticed that you talked about that a good metrics should be relevant, actionable, and quantifiable. How can product teams apply this RAC principle to make better decisions?
I am coming out with a Miro template that probably will be out by the time of this this podcast is out. But what can teams do is I think the principle behind survival metrics, and I think decision making in general, starts with laying out what's important, qualifying what is important, and then putting it through some trials, right? Testing that to see, is this worth our time or not? So for a product manager, in order to rack your metrics, what I suggest you do is think about all the metrics that you think are important now. Lay them out, list them out. And if you do this with people, even better, right? If you adhere to like Marty Kagan's philosophy, balanced team, engineer, lead, product manager, designer, this is a great exercise to do with those three, what they call your core team. You list out these metrics, and then you ask yourself, first, is it relevant? Right? What problem are you trying to solve? And how does this metric measure your ability to succeed or fail against that metric? And then, is there something in which you are operating against that? Is there an action that you're doing? If you can't answer those three questions, then how important is it, right? It's probably vanity in some ways, or you need to stop and answer those questions. And then you go down to the next one, and the next one, and the next one. You start with relevancy. If it passes the relevancy check, then you're going to ask yourself, is it actionable? What are the stakes with this number, right? If we fail in X amount of time, what happens? Is it important, right? And again, much like with the much like with the R here, right? When we talk about actionable, right? Check yourself. If it passes this, then move on. If not, then throw it out, right? It's not really an important or impactful metric for you that's going to create action. And lastly, we're talking about being quantifiable. And to have a metric be quantifiable, you got to be able to take it and transform it into different things, different ways, right? Everything ends at revenue or cost, right? When we talk about quantifiable metrics, we're often talking about leading and lagging indicators. The lagging indicator at the end of the road is revenue or cost. Everything goes back to revenue or cost. And then as you go back, there are more and more things that lead to that, right? Can you draw that map with that metric that you have? And what that map is going to be able to help you do is, as you go closer to revenue, you're able to communicate that to your executives, right? Because that's what they care about. And oftentimes I hear product managers go, oh, they talk about revenue. What am I supposed to do? Well, what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to take revenue, right, which you can't affect, and find the things that lead up to the thing that you can. Build that metric map, and then communicate depending on who your audience is based on that map, right? That is how you get to revenue. And then for those that lead behind it, right, what are the things that affect it that affect other teams? And now you're able to go talk to your sales rep. You're able to go talk to your customer success rep. You're able to go talk to your designer, right? And you're able to use numbers that affect them. And so if you can do all three of those things, you can rack your metric, then it's probably very, very important. You should probably have it everywhere, and you should probably talk about it a lot. And The things that you can't, that don't pass muster, you should probably stop talking about it so you can put more energy on the metric that matters, right? And so I think the biggest problem with product teams now is they're measuring way too much. And it's not really effective because people don't know what to follow. But if you're able to rack that metric, it's probably something that you should direct everybody's attention to, or a derivative of that metric, and move on.
Yeah, absolutely. And how do the concept from 5D Sense of strategy and survival matrix framework correlate, and can they be used together to enhance strategy execution?
Yeah, I think they dance pretty well together. When it comes to the 5 deadly sins, is just a health check, as it relates to your strategy. I think it's a really good way of improving customer communication, which is always helpful in the survival metrics framework, because you're going to need to go talk to other people. And if they think your strategy isn't worth it, then they probably aren't talking to you, or you don't have a place or a basis to have the conversation. And when I think about how these two dance together too, one of the things that the 5 deadly sins, if you go through and you work on that, what happens is other teams start to trust you more, because you're much clearer as a product manager about what is happening and what is important. When it comes to survival metrics is asking teams to make change, and make change probably at a pace that they are not comfortable with if they do not have, if they're not really strategically, and I would argue not really product led, right? I don't think most companies are. They say they are, but they're not. You need trust to do that. And so you can build your trust with the 5 deadly sins. And then, when you ask people to, like, we need to stop this, they're more likely to listen to you. And so I think that's how they dance. They play around with each other quite well.
Yeah. And as an AI lecturer, how do you see AI and machine learning influencing the future of product management and strategy development?
I think I don't know. I think they have a lot of questions around artificial intelligence, especially when it comes to these two realms. When it comes to strategy, how well do you trust the AI's ability to analyze information and spit back out something that's readable or feasible to you? Right now, in the world of generative AI, I don't really trust it. Now, can it get better? Sure. But, more than a few times I've given it a document that I've already read and said, summarize this, right? And it kicks out something that's not the document at all, And so when it comes to strategy, right, a lot of what you're asked to do when it comes to strategy is to take a whole bunch of different sources and then compress it, and then spit it back out so that people understand what your challenge is and how you intend to solve it. So if I can't trust AI to analyze information cleanly, I don't know what its place in strategy is so much outside of building communication documents, right? That's a great use case. If I need to transform some numbers into a graph, great. If it's an easier way of selling that information. In terms of like metrics, there's a lot of work going on in terms of teams trying to figure out what they call ETL, extract, transform, load, right? And when you talk about data management, really that's the crux of it. Can you extract the data cleanly? Can you transform it into a way that is readable or understandable? And then can you load it somewhere so that you can use it? There are a lot of companies that have tried this. A lot of companies have failed with this. I think there is a future in it, though. I think long term, the ability because we're starting to see some improvements when it comes to like medicine, right? And so I think there's an opportunity for that when it comes to data crunching, and to help us there. I don't know if we're there yet, without very particular models, which is why it works for medicine, but not so much, your latest SaaS app. But where does that go? I'm not sure. So I'm going to have to give you the I don't know yet on that. But I think that with time, perhaps something will come that will be very helpful for teams. But as of right now, trust but verify with everything you use with AI. It can speed you up, but make sure it's not sending you down the a wrong direction. And so if you're going to use it, take the time that you save by leveraging it and use that time to read the primary sources, right? So that you know if you're getting something right or not.
Yeah, absolutely. We are slowly getting close to the end of this episode. And I want to ask you if you have maybe another cool stories to share, or is there anything exciting you've been working on that you want the listeners to check out?
What have I been working on? I'm always working on ways in which I can communicate these concepts better. For those that are curious, there are Miro workshops for I think 3 of these concepts. So survival metrics, 5 deadly sins, and probably by the time this comes out, it'll be one for the racking your metrics. I would love feedback if you are able to give it. Work this out with your team. Email me. Perhaps I can facilitate the workshop for you if you'd like. When it comes to the Miro board, I don't want to. It's not going to be too expensive, right? Because we're just trying things. But I would love your feedback there. The other thing is I am gearing up to do a Maven survival metrics workshop. Now, my Maven survival metric workshop is a bit different than if you've taken my survival metrics workshop at a conference, for example, or if you've taken it, maybe I did a couple hours with you and your team. The Maven workshop is a real deep dive. We are going to spend hours, right? We're talking about a week together every night, focusing on a different part of survival metrics, building resources, building communication tools, so that when you walk out of there, you're able to implement survival metrics wherever you are. And you have a network of folks that are going to talk with you, walk with you around that idea and tell you how it's going in their neck of the woods. Right. So it's the Miro workshop just exploded. We go deep. And, what I've heard back from folks that have done this is that, it's led to a promotion or 2. It has made people far more confident in how they talk about strategy. And more importantly, and most importantly, it helps them learn what are the right questions to ask around strategy, around data and metrics, and around stakeholder communication. And so that's the pitch. If you want to come by, I'd be happy to have you. Contact me, and we'll get it started.
Thank you so much, Adam. Please go ahead and check Adam's LinkedIn. Check these different frameworks and strategies on Miro. And I'm sure that there's a lot to be learned. Thank you so much for joining this episode.
Bye.